So 2025 is quickly coming to a close with 2026 looming on the horizon, and I'm like, yo, where did this year go, man? It just feels like time goes by so much faster the older you get. But it was obviously a very interesting, a very weird year of 2025 in the world of video games. Yes, there were highlights, but there were lots of lowlights throughout the year as well. You know, things like studio closures, massive layoffs, systems going up in price instead of going down in price, Xbox doing whatever they're doing, Sony not releasing many first-party titles, and of course Nintendo finally releasing the Nintendo Switch 2 after a long waiting period. Now, as I always tell you guys, I'm not a Nintendo YouTuber. And the reason I say that is because a standard traditional Nintendo YouTuber will tell you how great the 2025 year was for the Nintendo Switch 2, but I'm not necessarily sure I see it that way. I think there were high points for the system, and I think there were low points for the system. Things that I definitely liked and things that I didn't like. So I kind of want to take a look back at the Switch 2 in 2025, talk about the things that I did like, and then talk about some of the things that I did not like. But first, before we go into that, you guys know I am a big fan of protection. And that's where today's video sponsor comes into play, Belkin. Were you a good boy or girl this year and Santa slimed his way down your chimney and brought you a Switch 2? Well, guess what, pal? You need protection. So why not pick up the Belkin charging case that will not only protect your Nintendo Switch 2, but give it some additional juice for those long gaming sessions on the go. The Belkin charging case allows you to safely charge, store, and transport your Nintendo Switch 2 on the go. You can recharge your Nintendo Switch 2 up to 1.5 times with a removable 10K power bank that fits perfectly into the case itself. The game card storage flap keeps all your favorite titles neatly arranged and easily accessible when you're wanting to play either a game key card or a full-on physical release. You can charge the console when it's stored inside of the case and closed, and it has a smooth, hidden, no-snag, heavy-duty zipper so that you can access your system whenever you want. I took my Switch 2 outside in the Belkin charging case, and I'm a bumbling fool and I dropped it in the snow. But there was nothing to worry about. It's a durable abrasion and water-resistant polyester exterior with a brushed velvet interior lining, so my Nintendo Switch 2 was safe and sound. Be sure to pick up your Belkin charging case for your Nintendo Switch 2 by checking out the link in the description box down below, and a huge thank you to Belkin for sponsoring today's video. So I want to start the video off with the positive things from the Nintendo Switch 2 in 2025. Now, I will say that the system launch was actually very well handled. I felt there was a bountiful stock of systems to choose from. I ended up getting mine at a midnight release at Best Buy. There were several hundred people waiting in line for this system, and nobody went away empty-handed. It was very readily available. The games were easily available as well, and it was overall was a very smooth experience. You know, very different than what a lot of us had to deal with the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series because, well, there wasn't a pandemic or anything going on. So I did enjoy the launch of the Switch 2, and I do think that there were some highlights as far as games were concerned. Obviously, the big launch game for the system was Mario Kart World, and while I don't think Mario Kart World is a 10 out of 10 game as it stands right now, I think that there is groundwork for a game that could definitely learn to grow quite a bit and added a bunch of additional content. Now, that's not to say that Mario Kart World doesn't have a lot of content in it, because it does. And really, I played this game for 30, 40 plus hours, and generally speaking, I had a really good time with it. But I did kind of feel like there was a bit of a drop-off, especially in things like the open world, which I actually enjoyed the open world quite a bit more than a lot of other people did, because I just kind of like the exploration and the different environments that you could go into. But it definitely feels like it's sort of a groundwork for more stuff to be added into. We haven't seen any sort of DLC for Mario Kart World yet, which actually surprises me a little bit. I'm thinking that maybe in the springtime of 2026, they're going to do an actual content update, but they have been doing subsequent updates to Mario Kart World in terms of tinkering with things and listening to fan feedback with things like being able to do different races online and being able to link up with your friends, because that was definitely a disappointment that you couldn't really do like knockout tour and stuff with your friends online, and not everyone plays with people in local multiplayer. But I definitely had a lot of fun with Mario Kart World, and I still think it is a very solid game and one of the better games on the Nintendo Switch 2. Really, my favorite first-party game, though, on the Switch 2 from Nintendo was, Donkey Kong Bonanza, pal. I think Donkey Kong Bonanza was an absolute blast to play through. I purchased the DLC, which, it was a little bit overpriced for the DLC. I think it should have been $10 or included with the Nintendo Switch 2 online expansion pack. But Donkey Kong Bonanza was definitely a very, very fun game. It looked very pretty. It utilized graphical techniques that we usually see Nintendo kind of not really do. And just overall, I had an absolute blast with that game. I like the end game content in the game as well. It's a collect-a-thon, so your mileage will vary as far as, how much stuff you're really going to want to do within the game. But I was definitely very pleased with Donkey Kong Bonanza, and it is by far my favorite first-party game of 2025 from Nintendo on the Switch 2. I also really liked how they implemented the backwards compatibility with Switch 1 games. Obviously, a lot of Switch 1 games that had uncapped frame rates got a boost on the Nintendo Switch 2, which was very, very nice. We're starting to see more and more companies utilize Switch 1 versions of games for the Switch 2 and have little upgrades for them. I know Divinity 2 just had like an upgrade and stuff like that. And still having access to the Switch 1 library is something I feel is very important. Terminator 2D No Fate was really one of my favorite games of 2025. I even bought the collector's edition of it, like the $100 and something collector's edition of it. And I have the digital version, so I didn't really need this. But I thoroughly enjoyed that game so much because I am such a big fan of Terminator 2, the movie, and I feel like it did a great job of replicating it. But the backwards compatibility, I think, was implemented very well, and it was definitely nice to see Nintendo updating the backwards compatibility list of Switch 1 games on the Switch 2. Some Switch 1 games did have problems, but Nintendo definitely went a bit above and beyond to ensure as many games as possible that ran on the Switch 1 would work and work in a fashionable manner on the Nintendo Switch 2. And then you also have the third-party games for the Nintendo Switch 2, which, there were definitely some very interesting games that came out for the system. And some of the highlights for me were things like WWE 2K25, which, honestly, this is my favorite version of the game. Well, I don't know if it's my favorite version of the game because I wish that it had custom images. Like, the custom images definitely help with the creation suite in order to customize stuff and make like your own images that maybe wrestlers and other companies use and stuff like that. But as far as the game is concerned, this is an absolutely brilliant third-party port on the system. Runs at 60 frames per second, has game share built into it so you could play online with a friend and they do not need a copy of the game, and you could play with multiple friends because I have played with multiple friends and we all had an absolutely flawless experience for the most part with playing it with 4 people in one room. So definitely a very positive game when it comes to a third-party game. Cyberpunk 2077 was definitely another standout title for the Switch 2. Obviously, this being on a full cartridge was definitely very attractive for a lot of people. Cyberpunk 2077 was a game that I played on the Xbox One when it first came out because I dared question as to why we hadn't seen a PS4 or an Xbox One version of the game up until the release of it. People said I was crazy, and then that game came out, and boy, oh boy, was I spot on right. But the game has obviously undergone many transformations since the initial launch on the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, and once again, the Switch 2 version is absolutely fantastic. I actually played and beat the game this year for the first time, and I actually enjoyed it quite a bit more than I thought. Other highlights include stuff like Sonic Racing Cross Worlds, which just came out on the Nintendo Switch 2. If you're looking for a bit more of a traditional karting experience as opposed to what Mario Kart offers, I think this is a super good version of the game. And Ubisoft games. Now, I'm not saying that the Ubisoft games were good, because I don't really care for Star Wars Outlaws or Assassin's Creed Shadows quite as much as a lot of other people do. I did finish Star Wars Outlaws when I reviewed it initially on the Xbox Series X. I never got around to finishing Assassin's Creed Shadows, but to see these Ubisoft games, which are obviously very graphically intense games and have their own custom proprietary engines running and looking very flawless on the Switch 2 for the most part, you know, and then Ubisoft coming along and improving things as the versions, you know, come out. Like, they did subsequent patches to Star Wars Outlaws to make it look and run even better. They did additional patches for Assassin's Creed Shadows to fix the problem when you would go into a town and the frame rate would the frame pacing more so, would kind of go all over the place. They've already fixed all of that sort of stuff. So I thought that was pretty impressive, just how much stock they're putting into the system. And while I might not be a huge fan of the games themselves, I do think it bodes well for future engines to be running on the system. You can also look at games like Street Fighter 6, which uses the RE engine, which is probably one of the best, if not the best engine out there. I'd say that and the Decima engine are probably two of the better engines that people can use. And you look at like Street Fighter 6 on the Switch 2, and it's an absolutely, you know, fantastic way to play the game. So, you know, there was a lot of great third-party games that came out, and even if maybe the games themselves weren't all that captivating for me personally, I was still able to appreciate the technical aspects of it, and just to see how far the Switch 2 could be pushed. And with games like Resident Evil Requiem coming out in 2026, I think it's going to be very interesting seeing how third-party games work out on the Nintendo Switch 2. So all of that, I thought, was very good stuff. You know, you get to see kind of the graphical prowess of the system. You get to see Nintendo cook a little bit with it. But now we got to get into the negative stuff. And I do think that there is, you know, I'll probably mention more things in the negative side than on the positive side, but that doesn't mean that they necessarily hold the same weight. But they are things that I feel like need to be addressed. And I feel like they are things that, you know, if they can't be addressed, it's just always going to be like a big question to me. The first thing we have to get into is the first-party software from Nintendo themselves, because while I was a huge fan of Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bonanza, there was definitely some games that came out that were kind of like, oh, all right, Drag X Drive. What's the point of this game? You know, I get what you're doing. You want to show off the mouse controls and stuff like that, but you could have just like made it a free thing. Like, it seems like it was built in Game Builder Garage, whatever that game was called on the Switch 1. Like, it wasn't a good game. It had no Nintendo personality. It was very sterile. It was very odd for a first-party Nintendo game. Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour costing $10. Well, it's only $10, RGT. That's not a lot of money. And yeah, you're right. It's only $10. So why does this company that makes billions and billions in gross profit a year worried about $10 of my money? Like, I just thought this was yet another thing that could have been included into the system. Like, I get it. It's only $10, but in the same breath, it's only $10. But I'm able to look past those two games. But these next two games, I don't know. You know, Kirby Air Riders, I probably was never going to like to begin with. It never really appealed to me on the GameCube. And the Switch 2 game, I mean, it's fine. You know, it's a fine experience. There are some cool things that you can do here and there in it. But it felt like a weird game to release so early in the system's life cycle, because to me, it definitely felt more like a filler title. But the biggest disappointment had to be Metroid Prime 4. I don't know what happened in the development of this game, and I don't think the game is necessarily bad. I just think it's good. And for a Metroid Prime game, good does not cut it. These games are supposed to be great. They are statistically great, especially when we're just considering the main line of Metroid Prime games. But as far as I'm concerned, this is one of the weakest Metroid Prime games that we've ever really seen. Like, I feel like Metroid Prime 4, you know, if you said, okay, RGT, give me a tier list of Metroid Prime games, I would go 1, 2, 3 as the best. I would go Prime Hunters, and then I would have Metroid Prime 4 right next to Prime Hunters, because at least Prime Hunters, what it kind of lacked in the single player experience, it more than made up in the multiplayer experience. But Prime 4, I just didn't think the single player experience was all that great. Like, it could have been a lot tighter. It could have been a lot more fantastical. You know, obviously, by having to switch developers, that really didn't help things too much. But that was the biggest disappointment to me for 2025. Like, I didn't hate the game. I don't think it's a bad game. I think it's a good game. But there are definitely major flaws within it that held this game back for me from being something that I thought I could really love and would have been by far my favorite Nintendo Switch 2 game of 2025. But it definitely fell up very, very short in terms of that. Another thing I wasn't a huge fan of was the inconsistency when it comes to third-party developers having access to Nintendo Switch 2 dev kits. For some reason, Nintendo decided to employ a tier system with rolling this out, and many companies still do not have Nintendo Switch 2 dev kits, especially on the indie side of things. Now, I get it. You know, there are a lot of slop indie companies out there. Just look through the Nintendo Switch eShop to see all the hentai weirdo games that come out. I mean, if you like them, that's cool, man, but I don't know. That's kind of weird to me. If I want to see some boobies, just go on the internet, dog, or get a girlfriend or a wife or something. They got them in real life, and you don't have to buy all these hentai games. But I think the bigger issue to me was just how it was Nintendo themselves obviously had the dev kits, and select third-party devs had it, and not many indie devs at all had the system. And then they went to stage 2 where some more third-party devs got it, but they didn't really have a lot of time to cultivate their games quite like Nintendo had done. And then some indie companies got it. So it looks like in 2026, it'll be stage 3, where they are much more readily available. And just kind of, limiting who could put games on your platform was definitely a strange decision for me that I did not really care for all that much, because I do feel like it plays into the next factor, which is inconsistent third-party software in terms of performance. Because while I talked about enjoying games like Sonic Racing Crossworlds and WWE 2K25 and Cyberpunk 2077, I did not enjoy some of these third-party Nintendo Switch 2 games, and two that definitely spring to mind are Madden NFL 26 and NBA 2K 26. I'm a white guy who likes sports, and I love my New York Knicks, and I like my New York Giants, and to be getting these 30 frame per second, and in the case of Madden, less than 30 frame per second with inconsistent frame pacing versions of the games is just completely unacceptable. Especially when we have WWE 2K25, which runs at 60 frames per second. We already have a baseline here. This is a 2K game, so why is NBA 2K running at 30 frames per second? It just doesn't feel as good with sports games. Certain games, I can look past the 30 frames per second, and it doesn't bother me all that much. But in a game that's based more so on timing, and games and franchises that I am more familiar with, such as Madden and NBA 2K on my Xbox that are at 60 frames per second, this was definitely something very troubling for me, and something that I was definitely very disappointed in. And I feel like it's because these companies didn't have their dev kits as long as potentially other companies did. The thing with WWE 2K25 was Shiver Entertainment. Is it Shiver Interactive or Entertainment? I believe it's Shiver Entertainment. Shiver Entertainment actually helped out with WWE 2K25 on the Switch 2. Shiver Entertainment, of course, was purchased by Nintendo earlier this year, so they probably had a dev kit longer than NBA 2K did. So I wouldn't be surprised if in 2026, those games run at 60 frames per second, but it's not 2026. We're not having the 27 editions of these games yet. These are the versions that we have, and to charge full price for them and have the early editions and stuff, and the games not to be running at an optimal level was definitely something that I did not enjoy. And really, the final thing that I want to focus in on that I didn't really care for was the fact that, the upcoming 2026 lineup, as far as spring of 2026 that we learned about in the last Nintendo Direct, it's not really too appealing to me. A lot of the first-party games I'm not super interested in. The Mario Tennis game looks fun, but I'm not interested in playing Animal Crossing or Pokopia or anything like that. It felt very soft, and, now you're creeping up on a year into the system, and when you start dating games for later spring months and stuff like that, it's okay, well, where's the big haymaker? Where's the big marquee tentpole title? I think third parties are going to have to carry a lot in the first half of 2026, but I don't even think that that's going to be a problem for third parties. Like I said before, Resident Evil 9 Requiem is coming to the Switch too, and the version of the game looks great. I'm also going to be playing through Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade because I never played the Intergrade stuff when I played the game on the PS4. So that's all new additional content for me, and I thoroughly enjoy that game. You can also check out games like Pragmata and stuff like that. I think there's going to be a lot of surprise third-party games in 2026 now that companies actually have their dev kits. But it's like, why didn't they have them in 2025 to, or earlier, I should say, like even 2024, so that they could have had their games ready to be on the Switch 2 when the system came out? And I guess the big elephant in the room is, what's going to happen with the price of the system? 2026 is going to be an interesting year for technology, folks, but I'll save that for another video, and we'll talk about stuff like that in the very, very near future. But those are my thoughts on the Nintendo Switch 2 in 2025. I definitely had a lot of fun with the system. I was a bit annoyed with certain things on it, but it's growing pains. It's companies learning new hardware, how to optimize the hardware, this, that, and the other. I think baseline-wise, in terms of, what the system has been capable of already, I am happy with it overall. I have had a lot of fun with the system. I just think things can be better, things can be tightened up, and some of these things are not going to be issues anymore, such as third-party devs having their development kits for the Switch 2, but it's definitely something that did impact 2025 for me, at least on a personal level. So let me know in the comments section down below, what do you think about my highs and lows for the Switch 2 in 2025, and what were your highs and low points? Are you a Nintendo fanboy who loves everything? And if so, I'm glad, man. I'm glad you find enjoyment out of it. Or do you hate Nintendo and you hated everything? And once again, I'm glad that you hate everything. Like, I don't care. Do you, Playboy? Like, it ain't got nothing to do with me. As long as you are respectful to the Knicks, we'll be fine and we'll be friends. And as always, guys, thank you for checking out this video. Big shout out to Belkin for sponsoring this video today. Go check out that charging case. Yes, I did throw my Switch 2 in the snow. My butthole puckered up a little bit when I did it. But that case, dude, it was crazy because it dried so fast. Like, it was absolutely nuts, and like everything was fine. And having the charger, that's what I actually used at my grandma's house when I went over there for Christmas, a couple days ago. I brought that case and my charger, and I didn't have to worry about like bringing a charging cable because that kept me through the holiday season over there. And as always, thank you guys for checking out this video. If you're new to the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Be sure to like, comment, and share. Hit the bell as well. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next video. Later.